Adobe Firefly is the all-in-one creative studio with AI-powered image and video editing for today's creative process. Built for creators of every kind, Firefly helps you generate, edit, and experiment fast. Because the asks aren't getting smaller, the budgets aren't getting bigger, and the timelines, oh yeah, still tight. With all the best creative AI models in one place, Firefly brings your ideas to life. Unlock a better way to make with Adobe Firefly.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
Welcome to a special bonus episode of the Middle Podcast. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you are a dedicated listener to our podcast, you heard our recent episode about what the U.S. relationship with China should look like. There was so much to talk about, and so many of you called in.
The situation with Taiwan is unsustainable. Either we have to endorse their independence or we have to facilitate reunification.
I was grew up in mainland, and Chinese communists killed so many Chinese people. United States should not engage.
I was wondering how the United States would be able to maintain relations with China and back Taiwan while not escalating the conflict.
A lot of interesting points, and we're going to get to even more of your questions and comments this hour with a special guest. Bill Kirby is professor of China Studies at Harvard University and director of the Harvard China Fund and author of Empires of Ideas. Bill Kirby, great to have you on The Middle.
Great to be here, Jeremy. Real pleasure.
What is the Harvard China Fund, by the way?
The Harvard China Fund is our, what you might call an academic venture fund for our students and our faculty for pursuing research, teaching, and other opportunities with counterparts in China with Chinese universities, linking ourselves to a system of higher education that's the fastest growing in quality as well as quantity in the world.
And the students have been able to start doing that again post-COVID-19?
Yep. We send students to do internships with international companies in China, with Chinese companies, with NGOs and other things. We have joint programs with both in Taiwan and mainland China on both language training, starting a summer school in Shanghai next summer on the history and culture of Shanghai.
So before we get to some of the listener comments that came in, I want to ask you a few questions at the top to really set the stage for this discussion. How would you characterize our relationship with China right now? You know, trade partner, adversary, competing superpower, all of the above. Where do you view the U.S. relationship with China?
Well, I think we are some part of all of the above, but we are we have in the last several years evolved toward a more practical and sober relationship with the People's Republic of China, with mainland China. It is an enormous the second largest economy in the world. We have enormous economic interests there, and they also with us. We have common interests in areas of climate control, in security in the East Asian region, even if we don't always agree on what those interests are. The United States is a global power engaged in every corner of the world, and some would argue rather engaged in too many corners of the world. China is a major regional power with global interests as the second largest economy in the world. Our trajectories have been different over time, but the United States remains the preeminent global power. China says, or the Chinese government says, that it does not wish to displace American leadership.
But it also does wish to be at the same level. Doesn't Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, keep making moves that sort of show that China is an equal with the United States, or he wants it to show that?
Well, it depends on what area you're talking, one is talking about. But the kind of international system that we have today was created in the post-World War II period by China and the United States and other countries working together. That was nationalist China at that time. But the People's Republic has been a huge beneficiary of the system that was then created. I think China wants to be treated with respect, wants people to give it the respect that it believes it deserves for the growth of its economy, for the international assistance, not all of which is pure assistance, that it gives overseas, and for its growing role and interest across the globe. It does not wish to be ignored on issues of major international consequence, and nor can it be.
A lot of our listeners raise concerns about China's policy goals and the impact they may have here in the U.S. Does China's success, do you believe, come at the expense of the United States' success, or can the relationship continue to be mutually beneficial?
Well, one of the remarkable things which no one would have imagined when Richard Nixon visited Mao Zedong in 1972 is that a relationship that did not exist except then in the strategic realm would exist in so many other realms. In the economic realm, where we are mutually intertwined, if not entirely codependent. In the cultural realm, with hundreds of thousands of Chinese students studying in the United States, benefiting from American higher education, and bringing many of the values of that back to China. Mm-hmm. In almost any realm that one can imagine, this has been a mutually beneficial relationship. But the history of U.S.-China relations is also a history of great ups and great downs. We were allies in World War II. We were enemies in Korea. We were adversaries in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And then we had a friendly entente against the Soviet Union from the 1970s really until the end of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. Now China is emerging as a major and great power of its own, with its own distinct interests, and it's a challenge not just for the United States, but for all of China's neighbors to deal with it.
You mentioned the ups and downs. Let's listen. This is something you would probably call an up, which was President Nixon's famous visit to China in 1972.
There can be no stable and enduring peace without the participation of the People's Republic of China and its 750 million people. That is why I have undertaken initiatives in several areas to open the door for more normal relations between our two countries.
That was an opening of the relationship between the U.S. and China, but many observers saw the relationship hit a low point when Donald Trump was president, and he basically started a trade war. Listen.
The United States has just announced tariffs on another $200 billion in Chinese-made goods, for a total so far of $250 billion. I have great respect and affection for my friend, President Xi, but I have made clear our trade imbalance is just not acceptable.
Now, many of the tariffs have remained in place under President Biden. Is this, do you think, a low point in the U.S.-China relationship?
Well, it's certainly not the low point in U.S.-China relationship. The low point was the Korean War, where we were actually at war one with another in that tragic conflict. The This was a war, the trade war, by contrast. Of course, one can understand the American frustration with the trade imbalance. We had one with Japan of a similar size comparatively in the 1980s. That was dealt with in part by welcoming Japanese investment to the United States. Rather than welcoming, say, private Chinese companies to invest in the United States today, we unilaterally changed the rules of the trade game, put in place tariffs that hurt American farmers, then subsidized those American farmers to the cost of $40+ billion a year that American taxpayers are paying for. It has been a mutually destructive set of affairs that were set in place in the Trump administration, which I think, unfortunately, the Biden administration has kept in place.
We've got a lot of questions that came in from listeners for you. We're going to get to those in just a moment. But first, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more of The Middle.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of to come around here and my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm talking with Bill Kirby, professor of China Studies at Harvard University. Let's get to some listener calls and comments. This one came from a Wisconsin farmer.
Hi, my name is Roger McGinnis. I'm from Grantsburg, Wisconsin. What does the policies just signed by China for the GMO grain market, what is that going to affect? How is that going to affect the U.S.'s exports? And is it wise to sell them the technology for the GM grain now that they're making them sell U.S.-owned farms by China? Is it wise to sell property to China, the farms in our country? I don't think it's very wise. I think they should be redecided and really thought hard about before the sales of land in our country to them.
Bill Kirby, there's a lot to unpack there. Basically, what he's talking about is that China has approved the import of some genetically modified soybeans and corn. They are the biggest importer in the world of soybeans and corn, but also Roger brings up the Chinese ownership of American farms, which is minimal so far, less than 0.03% of American farmland. But at its core, this is a farmer worried about China gaining access to American technology and farmland.
Well, I think we have to take the larger picture. China is a huge export market for American farms because China is land poor. not in terms of size of land, but less than 10% of China's entire territory can be used for the growing of grain and other farming products. So China, it is good news that they want to import more from the United States, and including more advanced types of grains and goods and soybeans. And we're in a moment of what I would call mutual paranoia by both the United States and China, particularly at the governmental level, where people fear the worst and imagine that both sides have deep and sustained conspiracies against one another. But the fact of the matter is American farmland is not being sold away to foreigners. Only 3% of all privately held agricultural land in the United States is owned by foreign entities. Out of 111 countries that own Chinese farmland, China ranks only number 18. As you said, less than 1% of foreign held are held by Chinese. So this is really not something to worry about. Getting more customers and more Chinese customers for American grain, that is something to be happy about.
So why are there governors around the country who are banning the Chinese ownership of their farmland as if this is a much bigger problem?
Because it's an easy political win. We're in a moment where it's easy to demonize the Chinese, as we did in the late 19th century and early 20th century, and again during and after the Korean War, because so many people know so little about China. I'm always struck in the United States where people say China is doing this, China is doing that. The farmland actually that is been purchased, the largest farmland purchased in the United States, is by a private Chinese agribusiness, not by the Chinese government. But too often our journalists will kind of lazily say, China is doing this, China is doing that. I've been to China hundreds of times. I've never met China. I don't know what she looks like. Do you mean the Chinese government? Do you mean the Agricultural Bank of China? Do you mean the CP Group, a great international Chinese agribusiness? It's actually not Chinese, but Thai, but with Chinese roots. This all gets rolled together in a kind of a mindless way when we are ourselves afraid and insecure.
But doesn't the Chinese government have a heavy hand in a lot of the industries there?
Of course. It has a substantial hand in many producer industries and some of the leading strategic industries. But the most dynamic companies that have changed, for example, the face of Chinese agriculture are not Chinese state-owned companies. They are private companies that have reinvented agriculture on a large scale in different parts of China. Look at in the area of business-to-business cooperation. Alibaba revolutionized the way people do business in China by allowing people who didn't know each other to do business with one another, facilitating trade and commerce across provincial boundaries in a way that has never happened in Chinese history. The government had almost nothing to do with it.
Let's listen here to another listener comment that came in.
Hi, Joe from Massillon, Ohio calling. My issue with America's alignment across the globe for security, for economic advantage, is we need to start focusing more on the Western Hemisphere. We have all these problems in our hemisphere that we do not prioritize. And I feel that China's important. China's an aggressive nation, an aggressor against the democracies of the world. But we need to focus on helping the countries in the Western Hemisphere developing strength in our hemisphere for the foreseeable future.
Bill Kirby, what about that? Is it even possible at this point for the U.S. to allow China to be and stop focusing so much? Our relationship is so intertwined at this point.
Well, I totally sympathize with the idea that the United States should pay more attention to what happens in the Western Hemisphere, to Latin America, to South America more broadly. At the same time, as a global power with interests in every corner of the globe, the United States, I think, would be very foolish to walk away. We have partnerships and allies in the Asia-Pacific region and have had them since the Second World War. We have an important role to play in the protection of international trade. That also serves our friends south of the border, who are large traders, by the way, with China as well. I think we have to push back again unstated assumptions that China is an aggressor nation. Without question, President Xi Jinping's foreign policy has been a truculent foreign policy, and he has presided over the worsening of relations with every one of his neighbors except for Russia. However, China has not sent troops abroad since in the founding of the People's Republic. China is not engaged in an expansion of its physical territory, although, of course,
currently, right? There's a question about whether they might soon.
There's the question of Taiwan, which we should come to, but I think it's, what we have to, when one is dealing with international relations, we have to try to see the world the way the other side sees us. From a Chinese point of view, and I don't say that I agree with this entirely, but from a Chinese point of view, why is it that the Americans are still in such number in troops and interests in East Asia more than 70 years after the end of the Second World War? They're in Korea, they're in Japan. We have a strong military, not presence anymore, but a set of military sales to Taiwan and so on. This is something that looks different from Beijing than it does from Washington.
Just the fact that the U.S. sort of acts as the world's policeman, basically, and has these troops all over the world and in Beijing's backyard.
And, when Franklin Roosevelt met the Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek in 1943 in Cairo as allies during the Second World War, he believed that China would be and should be one of the four policemen of the world of the post-war period. That did not come to be. But China does have legitimate interests in Asia and elsewhere around the world that one has to take seriously.
Bill, let's listen to another call that came in.
From the sunflower state of Kansas, I am Brian Dahlquist. So here's my concern with China. They are strategically working their 100-year plan by way of their 50-year plan. They have, as a nation, they have a common goal. The goal I see is accumulating all the minerals in Africa, transport them overland to China. They are strategically working their allies around the world and accumulating the resources that the world is going to need. That's my concern.
So he brings up a very interesting point there, Bill Kirby, which is China's massive investment, not just across Africa, but across a lot of places. Some of this part of the Belt and Road Initiative. China has been trying to create a new Silk Road connecting ports around the world, also loaning money to countries, investing in countries to gain influence. How concerned should Americans be about this?
Well, first of all, again, we should not be too paranoid about the capacity of China to plan. I've never heard of a 100-year plan. Or a 50-year plan. China does have 5-year plans, and in some areas, 10-year plans. There are 5-year plans. There has never been a Chinese 5-year plan that has achieved all of its objectives. Let us be clear about this. Most of them do not come close in large areas. They're very ambitious plans. They're goal-setting plans, and if you were to look back on them, you would not be quite as fearful. It isn't so tragic to plan, actually, for one's future, and the Americans might do a bit of it.
Well, we've got an election every 4 years, and sometimes it completely changes the trajectory of the country when it happens.
Exactly. And I think there's too much alarmism about Chinese financing in Africa. The Belt and Road Initiative is one I would say is a very uneven success for China. Some of it is geopolitical. Some of it is simply the export of superfluous infrastructure, equipment, and goods from China, which is overproduced in that area. But Chinese financing in Africa has decreased rather precipitously since 2013, when this Belt and Road was first announced. Between 2017 and 2020, Chinese bank financing of these projects, BRI, Belt and Road Initiative projects, decreased from 11 billion US to 3 billion US. And new loans to Africa last year were just 1 billion US. And Xi Jinping himself has hinted at the need to tighten the reins over this Belt and Road Initiative, telling African leaders that Chinese investment is limited and should not be spent on what he calls vanity projects. So within China itself, as you can imagine, just as foreign aid in the United States is never the most popular topic with the average citizen development aid to Africa is not a particularly popular topic among Chinese citizens either. Just ask any taxi driver in Beijing. And yet, China has given more goods and more support for important infrastructure than Europe and North America. We should look at it if we believe that the Chinese are financing Africa out from under the United States and our influence, then goodness, why aren't we investing more in Africa?
So this also brings up the question about China's foreign policy. You mentioned earlier that the one country that China has gotten really close to is Russia and Vladimir Putin. That is obviously at odds with the United States when it comes to a lot of things, including Ukraine. The Chinese are also very close to North Korea's regime, which is definitely not a friend of the United States. There have been accusations that China has supplied weapons to Hamas. They're denying that. But why does China seem to want to be so close to so many of America's adversaries?
Well, the Russian thing is more complicated than this. The Chinese Communist Party was founded by Russians in 1921. By the Communist International based in Moscow. But the relationship between Chinese communists and those in Moscow has been a fractious one over many decades. A close alliance in the 1950s, a bitter break in the 1960s, leading nearly to war, in which the Soviet Union threatened to attack China's nuclear facilities and asked the United States, would we mind? And I think from my personal perspective, I think it's a very significant mistake on the part of President Xi to buddy up to Vladimir Putin. The future of China may be in many areas along this Belt and Road Initiative, may be well in East Asia, may be around the world economically. It is less likely to be in Russia. And this support of Putin's effort, particularly giving an endorsement of Mr. Putin, a rousing endorsement of Mr. Putin just weeks before the invasion of Ukraine, has done a great deal to set back China's relations with Europe, because China helped to unleash a war on Europe's doorstep, gave Mr. Putin a blank check. And I hope that check does not turn out to be as disastrous as the blank check that Germany gave Austria in the summer of 1914. That led to a much greater confrontation. But I think from the point of view of many in China, this is not a popular view and if you look at Mr. Xi's foreign policy overall, he has managed, as I said before, to exacerbate tensions with Japan, with Taiwan, with Vietnam, with India. And there was a period of time early in his tenure where he had bad relations with both Koreas. Very difficult to do. In fact, so I don't know if this is success, but I'd like to see what failure looks like. If this is indeed success. It has not been a very successful foreign policy.
So what do you make of it? Why do you think Xi has cozied up to Putin?
I think there's a sense on the part of some in the leadership, and obviously President Xi, that particularly at the end of the Trump era and at the beginning of the Biden era, that the United States was no longer going to be a reliable partner on areas in which they had relied upon, that the United States was trying to isolate China, and Russia was a place in which they could count on as a military co-balance. Now, this is the old tripartite game that President Nixon tried to play, but it is not. It is a bit of an indictment of American foreign policy, particularly in the Trump era, where we would end up having no influence either in Beijing or in Moscow. And this is why a rectification of our relations with China, at least to make them predictable and professional and not automatically adversarial, is very much in America's interest.
By the way, it was just reported by CNN that the Chinese have assured President Biden and the Biden administration that they will not meddle in the election this year. Do you have a sense of who President Xi wants to win if it's Trump versus Biden?
Well, I've met President Xi on several occasions, but I've never asked him that question. Yes, he's not a voter. I think my guess is that any logical leader in the world would like a predictable American president and not an unpredictable American president. And let me just leave that at that.
Okay. Bill, stand by. We've got more questions from listeners coming up right after this break.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of to come around here and my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm talking with Bill Kirby, professor of China Studies at Harvard University. Let's get to another listener comment here.
Matt Ginsberg-Jekyll, calling from Chicago, Illinois, calling in about the question on what the relationship should be between the U.S. and China. It should be one of cooperation to save the planet from global warming.
Cooperation to save the planet from global warming. So we're hearing a desire for that. I know that the Chinese environmental record has come under a lot of scrutiny. I found a couple of details that I want to just throw in here. Bloomberg just reported that China installed more solar panels in 2023 than any other nation has built in total. But also, according to Foreign Policy, 209 new coal power plants are either under construction or permitted in China. So what kind of actor is China when it comes to climate change?
That's a great question, because there is a difference between rhetoric and reality in China as there is in the United States. The one thing I think one can say at the start, I have never heard a Chinese politician or business leader claim that climate change is a hoax. Everyone there believes, everyone there of influence believes that climate change is real and one has to deal with it and cannot pretend that it doesn't exist. The Chinese government, Xi Jinping, has pledged unilaterally in front of the UN General Assembly to peak carbon dioxide emissions before 2030. and to get carbon neutrality by 2060. These are incredibly ambitious goals. And China, if they're successful, and they're behind schedule, China would be the global leader on climate change issues and renewable energy, when there's a lot of doubt as to whether the United States has the political will to be a partner in these efforts. These efforts at the same time have led to power shortages across China. And those power shortages have led to the coal-fired plants that are, you could argue and hope that they are short-term solutions, but China has an enormous capacity in coal, but it has yet to wean itself from dependency on fossil fuels and coal. So this is a debate going on in China, and a very open debate, in fact, on how to attain these very ambitious goals while maintaining a humming economy. The fact that the economy is no longer humming may reduce the need for more interim period coal-fired power plants.
What do you think, though, when you see a big climate summit happen and somebody in the United States says, well, why should we do anything? Because they're not going to live up to their commitments in China. And so it's pointless for the United States to act on climate change.
Somebody has to act on climate change, Jeremy. I mean, and these are the two largest polluters in the world. China by far number one, but we are by far ahead of anyone else who is in the number two position. If these two countries, the greatest polluters in the world, don't address the greatest emitters of CO2, don't address this issue and try to do it in a cooperative way, then there really is no hope for the rest of the world.
We've got time for one more comment from a listener. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, my name is Ian. I am calling from Ohio. I think really we should stay back and stay out of it. We have a very long history of intervening and meddling in the affairs of Asia. And I think while, many Americans, myself included, may not agree with many of China's policies, when we really try to intervene, it is usually for our best interest, not for any of the people there, and it ends up doing more harm than good. So I really think the best thing would be to sort of, stay out of it, despite the commitments that we've made before to Taiwan for all sorts of strategic Cold War reasons. Those, by and large, do not exist anymore. It seems entirely reasonable that we stay out of that affair.
Stay out of that affair. We're talking there about Taiwan. They just had an election, a presidential election. The winner is pretty pro-independence. China not happy about it. Bill Kirby, do you think China is on the verge of trying to take Taiwan with force?
I do not. I think such an effort would be so counterproductive, even if China won, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, that it would destroy U.S.-China relations overnight. It would destroy international investment in China overnight. It might destroy Shanghai or Xiamen or other mainland cities, because Taiwan has an army and an air force too. And it would just be a catastrophic move. And what would one win? What would win a population about the size of the population of Shanghai, and a very unhappy population at that. It is not in our interest to try to exacerbate tensions between mainland China and Taiwan. I think the new Taiwan president, President-elect Lai, will have a cautious policy toward the mainland, like his predecessor. There is no glory in declaring independence and thereby starting a confrontation that no one wants. And Taiwan should be very wary. I mean, I totally understand the listener's question about, or worry about American interventionism everywhere. We have this tendency to be busy everywhere and not terribly effective anywhere in the world. And it's a very worrisome tendency, because we have the capacity, so much greater capacity than anyone else. But we do have to think not of our own interests here only, but of those of our longstanding allies, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, even if it is not a military ally, and for stability in the Asian Pacific region. I believe that the best security however, at the end of the day for Taiwan is a good relationship between Washington and Beijing, a good and predictable and open relationship between Washington and Beijing.
What about the idea that Ian brought up there that the U.S. should just stand by if something were to happen to Taiwan? Is that feasible? Could the U.S. just say, "Oh, well, it's not our problem"?
Well, history is always a very imperfect guide to what we should do in the future. But if you take one example, in the spring of 1950, the Americans issued a white paper saying that we have no strategic interests in the East Asian region in the Korea-Taiwan area. And it was after we made it clear that we did not anticipate defending what had become this new proto-state of South Korea, that the North Koreans invaded with Stalin's urging and with Mao Zedong's support. So I think it's to say one is never going to take action. We turned around almost immediately. And President Truman not only sent American troops to Korea, he sent the 7th Fleet into the Taiwan Strait, de facto separating Taiwan from mainland China at that moment. And we've been engaged in both of those theaters ever since. It would be what we ought to be looking for is to solve the single most dangerous problem there, which is not Taiwan. Taiwan is not a danger to anyone. Mainland China poses danger to Taiwan. But the greatest danger, and a mutual danger for China and the United States, is North Korea. And just think about this, Jeremy. If North Korea continues to have nuclear weapons, South Korea will have nuclear weapons. If South Korea has nuclear weapons, Japan will have nuclear weapons the next week. Taiwan will have them the next month. Is this a more stable world toward which we should be looking? We should be working with the Chinese and need their cooperation to do it, to denuclearize North Korea. Otherwise, from a Chinese point of view, a multi-nuclear power East Asia is a strategic disaster. And it's not necessarily good for the United States either, not necessarily good for Japan or Taiwan. So this is an area of common concern that has seemingly fallen off the radar that we need to pay very, very serious attention to.
You mentioned that you have met President Xi a number of times. What would you want to tell our listeners about him that they may not understand from reading news reports?
Well, in the times that I've met him, I mean, they're formal meetings, of course, and they focus largely on higher education cooperation and educational operation. He has said frequently and quite honestly, he wants to send more students to the United States, not fewer. He did send his daughter
to
the United
Harvard,
States,
right?
At my university. And when his daughter returned, he thanked Harvard's president for her education. And he said to our then president, when she came back, her thought had changed. We have no idea what it means, but it can't be a bad thing that the leaders of other countries, and it's actually a good sign for the United States that the leaders of other countries, including some with which we have rather testy relations, send their children to study with us. He's an articulate man. He's obviously a very successful man in Chinese politics. He grew up at a time when a deep education in history or international relations was not possible because he was educated during the time of the Cultural Revolution. Mm-hmm. So his educational background is quite different from that either of his predecessors or whoever will be his successors. But he is obviously a man of some significance and consequence.
Let me ask you one more thing. When was your last visit to China?
December.
Okay, so post-pandemic, because there's been so much talk about how much China went through during the pandemic. Obviously, it started in China. The President Xi didn't even leave the country for a very long time during that pandemic. People were locked down in big, huge cities. The economy has suffered greatly in China. How is it different now than it was pre-COVID?
I think it's very different. And I would say that if you look at the economic doldrums in which China now is, and to some degree of political doldrums, with a kind of really diminution of support of some of the government's signature policies, which are favored state enterprise over private enterprise, favored state control over healthcare in such dramatic ways, and these lockdowns during the zero COVID people, where people in Shanghai locked down for months in their apartments, found out what it was like to be a Uyghur in Xinjiang, to have no rights whatsoever. This lingers very much. And I think China today is suffering what I would call a case of economic and political long COVID. The after effects of these 3 years are significant. They're also economic after effects. You know, all of this testing of everybody, time and time again, was paid for by local governments, mandated by the central government, but paid for by local governments, who are now basically bankrupt. They had relied in the past on real estate sales and resales of land for revenues to keep local governments going. But now the real estate sector is in a great crisis, an enormous crisis. And there's a fundamental question of how one finds the funds to fund a local government. And the two answers that are occurring from everyone I talk to in China, one is you actually cut the salaries of local officials who are not well paid to begin with, but this will guarantee a higher level of corruption. And second, you don't have any new taxes. You have all kinds of new fees and basically new taxes, in other words, on private enterprise and others, in order to try to balance the books. This is an old story in Chinese history, not a communist story. When local governments are running out of money, they go to whomever has it, and they try to take it, whether from your bank account or otherwise. The best example I know of this hasn't happened yet in mainland China today, was back in the 1930s in the province of Sichuan, where the local government was running out of money to support its industrial projects and its armed forces and so on, the provincial government. And then the biggest source of revenue was the land tax. So they decided to collect the land tax in advance. And in 1932, they were collecting the land tax for 1972. So you can't say the Chinese are not innovative.
I guess that's a 40-year plan. That's more than a 5-year plan.
It's a 40-year plan. But you see many old traditions, not necessarily good ones, not necessarily communist ones, emerging across the landscape because there is a real collapse of confidence at the moment in the Chinese economy.
Well, I have to say, I have not been to China hundreds of times. I've been there just a couple of times to mainland China. But what I did find was that it's an absolutely fascinating place, far more diverse than I think a lot of Americans think about China. But I've also been to Hong Kong before COVID, when, obviously China took back a lot of control over Hong Kong during that period. And it also makes me skeptical of Beijing because of what happened there. And I think, there's a lot to be said on both sides. We obviously heard from a number of listeners, but thank you so much, Bill Kirby at Harvard University, for coming on the show and answering those questions. Really fascinating discussion.
Jeremy, a great pleasure, as always, to talk with you.
And we'll be back with another episode of The Middle in just a few days. We're talking about whether former President Donald Trump should be on the ballot this fall as the Supreme Court hears arguments about that. You can reach out to us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com. Don't forget to sign up for our weekly newsletter when you are there. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Thank you so much for listening.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969, Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
When segregation was a law, one mysterious Black club owner, Charlie Fitzgerald, had his own rules.
Segregation in the day, integration at night.
It was like stepping on another world.
Was he a businessman, a criminal, a hero?
Charlie was an example of power. They had to crush him.
Charlie's Place, from Atlas Obscura and Visit Myrtle Beach. Listen to Charlie's Place on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.